With the beginning of World War II in September 1939, a series of brutal battles started. By the year 1942, the Second World War had reached a decisive and critical point. The military offensives launched by Nazi Germany were progressing successfully. Victory after victory fueled German confidence, and across Europe, Africa, and deep into Soviet territory, the Wehrmacht continued to advance relentlessly. The German forces under the leadership of Adolf Hitler seemed unstoppable.
Keine Macht der Erde kann mehr zerstören, was wir geschafft haben.
Unser Sieg ist unvermeidlich.
Quotes like these from Hitler show how confident the German government was about winning the war. But it weren't just German officials who believed this. Even other world leaders recognized and feared how powerful Germany had become.
The Germans have shown their formidable power and efficiency in the field, and the dangers to our country and to the cause of freedom are very real.
The Reichspower appeared absolute, and many believed that German victory was safe, that it was only a matter of time before the world would fall under Nazi domination.
But history had other plans. How did a seemingly invincible Germany begin to fall? How did the tide of war begin to turn against them? How did the once undefeatable Wehrmacht fail to win the war? There were many major events that caused the final defeat of Germany in 1945.
One of them was the Battle of Stalingrad and its development. In June 1942, German forces launched the summer offensive in the Soviet Union, aiming to capture Stalingrad and the Caucasus. On June 28, 1942, operations began with significant German victories. Hitler's goal was to eliminate Soviet forces in the south, secure the region's economic resources, and then conquer the remainder of the Caucasus to get fossil fuels, since previously Germany could only get those from Romania.
Another crucial reason for Germany's focus on Stalingrad was the strategic importance of the Volga River. The Volga River served as a major transportation route for the Soviet Union, allowing the movement of oil, grain and other critical supplies from the southern regions, especially from the oil fields of the Caucasus.
Capturing Stalingrad and cutting off the Volga would have severely disrupted Soviet logistics and denied the Red Army access to vital fuel resources necessary to continue the war effort. Hitler believed that gaining control over the Volga would strangle Soviet resistance and secure German dominance in the south.
On July 9, Hitler changed his original plan and ordered the simultaneous capture of both Stalingrad and the Caucasus. The division of forces placed immense pressure on an already strained logistical support system. It also caused a gap between the two forces, allowing Soviet forces to escape encirclement and retreat to the east.
Stalin and the Soviet High Command responded to the summer offensive by forming the Stalingrad Front. On July 28, Stalin issued Order Number 227, decreeing that the defenders at Stalingrad would take not one step back. He also refused the evacuation of any civilians, stating that the army would fight harder, knowing that they were defending residents of the city.
In August, the Battle of Stalingrad began. By mid-September, German forces had pushed the Soviets in Stalingrad back to a small strip of the city along the Volga River. At that point, fighting became brutal. Streets, blocks, and even individual buildings were fought over by many small units of troops and often changed hands again and again. By October 14th, the Soviet forces were pushed back further, enabling the Germans to fire at the remaining supply crossings of the river. The Germans, however, were growing dispirited by heavy losses, fatigue, and the approach of winter. Their inability to replace lost soldiers and equipment started to severely affect combat performance.
The turning point of the battle came with the huge Soviet counteroffensive, codenamed Operation Uranus. The offensive was started to attack weaker flanks, which were vulnerably exposed and were weakly defended, rather than the main German forces at the forefront of the battle for Stalingrad. From November 19 until November 23, the Soviet Operation Uranus encircled the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad. The German High Command urged Hitler to allow these forces to rejoin the main German forces west of the city, but due to Hitler's refusal to do so, these forces grew weaker. Hitler declared that the Sixth Army would be supplied by the Luftwaffe, but the Luftwaffe's supply flights could not meet basic needs, and the critical shortage of men and supplies doomed the Sixth Army to collapse.
In December, a German commander named Manstein tried to rescue the Sixth Army, but Hitler forbade a breakout. The Soviets tightened the encirclement with Operation Saturn. Surrounded and starving, Paulus surrendered on January 31 and the last German troops gave up on February the 2nd.
As Germany realized it was starting to struggle, propaganda efforts back home intensified. On February 18, 1943, Joseph Goebbels held a speech at the Berlin Sport Palace, motivating the German population to put more effort into the war.
Nun, Volk, steh auf und Sturm bricht los.
The Axis suffered over 800,000 casualties at Stalingrad, and only about 5,000 of the 91,000 who surrendered survived Soviet captivity. The Soviets lost around 1.1 million troops and 40,000 civilians.
Russians consider the Battle of Stalingrad to be one of the greatest battles of their Great Patriotic War, and most historians consider it to be the greatest battle of the entire conflict. It stopped the German advance into the Soviet Union and marked the turning of the tide of war in favor of all the Allies.
Shortly after the German defeat in Stalingrad, the Red Army further advanced into German territory, which led to the creation of the Kursk salient, a bulge in the Soviet lines. This salient later became the cause of the Battle of Kursk, which lasted from July 5th to August 23rd, 1943.
Germany planned a massive surprise attack to destroy Soviet forces trapped in the salient. Aiming to achieve this, Germany had sent around 900,000 troops and 2,700 tanks behind enemy lines. However, to the German surprise, the Soviets had anticipated the offense and were fully prepared, with hidden defenses, including tank traps and minefields. The Germans had fewer experienced tank crews and infantry units than earlier in the war, making it even harder to achieve a breakthrough.
By July 12th, the Germans had only advanced 16 kilometers in the north and 48 kilometers in the south, suffering heavy tank losses without achieving a breakthrough. After realizing the attack had failed, Germany called the operation off. The Soviets quickly launched powerful counteroffensives, pushing the Germans back even further. By the end of August 1943, German forces were behind their original positions, and the Soviets had claimed a clear victory.
The Battle of Kursk became the largest tank battle in history, involving around 6,000 tanks, 2 million soldiers, and 4,000 aircrafts. It marked a turning point in war. Germany lost its ability to launch large-scale offensives on the Eastern Front, clearing the way for great Soviet advances of 1944 and 45. The loss of so many tanks and trained soldiers, which Germany could not replace at the same rate as the Soviets, led to their strategic decline.
As German forces struggled on the Eastern Front and their southern defenses weakened after Italy's collapse, a new and decisive front opened in the west. At the same time, on the African continent, the war had also developed significantly. By the end of 1942, the Allies, mainly British and American forces, had defeated the German and Italian troops in North Africa. In the Second Battle of El Alamein, which lasted from October to November 1942, Rommel's Afrika Korps suffered heavy losses and the Axis powers lost control of North Africa entirely.
This loss had major strategic consequences. It not only deprived Germany of important supply bases and control over the Mediterranean, but also forced the German High Command to divert additional troops and resources that were desperately needed on the Eastern Front. As a result, the Wehrmacht became even more overstretched, and its ability to effectively fight on multiple fronts was severely weakened.
On June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, Allied forces launched Operation Overlord, aiming to storm the beaches of Normandy, France. Over 156,000 troops from the United States, Britain, Canada, and the other Allied nations landed that day. Despite facing strong German defenses and brutal fighting, especially at Omaha Beach, the Allies managed to secure an important foothold in France. The German army, already stretched thin across Europe, could not stop their advance.
Within weeks, hundreds of thousands more Allied soldiers and massive amounts of supplies were arriving in France. After breaking out from Normandy, the Allies moved quickly across northern France. Although German forces continued to fight fiercely, they were now in full retreat.
On August 25, 1944, Paris, which had been under German occupation since 1940, was liberated by French resistance fighters and the Free French Army, supported by American troops. The liberation of Paris marked a major collapse of German control in Western Europe.
The once powerful German military was now being crushed from three sides: by the Red Army in the east, by Allied forces in the south and by advancing Allies in the west.
After their invasion of Normandy in June 1944, the Allies moved across northern France into Belgium during the summer. Except for a failed attack at Arnhem, the Allies made only small gains in Western Europe during September and October 1944. At the same time, German forces grew stronger by bringing in reinforcements, new Volkssturm troops, and soldiers who had escaped from France. When the Allies launched a major attack in mid-November, it cost them heavily, but it achieved very little.
The Allies expected Germany to collapse soon, but the fighting dragged on. Meanwhile, the Germans secretly prepared for a major counterattack. They built up troops and supplies in the Ardennes, a forested region they thought the Allies would not expect an attack from.
The Germans had some initial success. They achieved complete surprise and pushed westwards through the middle of the American line, creating the bulge that gave the battle its name. But this success was short-lived.
The American forces quickly regrouped and put up fierce resistance, especially at key towns like Bastogne. Once Allied planes could fly again, they attacked German supply lines and positions.
By early January 1945, the German advance had been stopped and pushed back. The Battle of the Bulge ended in a costly German defeat, exhausting their remaining strength and speeding up the final Allied drive. With that, the Battle of the Bulge became the last big offensive of Germany.
While the Western Allies moved across the Rhine into Western Germany, Soviet forces advanced from the east. Throughout early 1945, the Red Army launched massive offensives, crushing German defenses in Poland and eastern Germany. By April, Soviet troops reached the outskirts of Berlin. Encircling the city from the north, east, and south, they trapped the remaining German forces inside. The final Battle of Berlin had begun, and Germany's defeat was now inevitable.
Even in the face of total defeat, Hitler remained defiant. In the beginning of 1945, Hitler was still optimistic and hoped for victory. He pressured the German people to not give up.
Wir kapitulieren nicht. Niemals. Wir können untergehen, aber wir werden eine Welt mitnehmen.
Though after it became clear that Germany would lose the Battle of Berlin, Adolf Hitler committed suicide via a gunshot in the head on 30th April 1945 in the Führerbunker in Berlin.
With the death of Adolf Hitler, Germany had no other recourse but to surrender to the Allies. The surrender took place on May 7. On May 8, 1945, celebrations erupted around the world to mark the end of World War II in Europe. This day is known as Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day. After that, on May 9, Germany surrenders to the Soviet Union. Of course, there are more underlying reasons for the German defeat too. For one, the Allies had better industry and better resources and a greater population. This allowed them to sustain better warfare than the Axis. They also had penicillin and their strategic points were advanced, which improved the chances of their soldiers' survival. Crucially, the decoding of the Enigma machine gave the Allies vital information on German operations.